Paul for some years, and part of the work for us in this conversation, I think any of the conversations that Paul and I have, it's about setting the tone. This book was a labor of love for Paul, but I think also part of this work is encapsulating the labor of love that was and is Mac Miller, right? And so I think part of the energy we want to keep in here is that spirit and energy of love and intention, right? So if we do get to a Q&A, let's keep it positive, let's keep it on level and on tone, and let's also make sure we're creating space for each other to potentially grieve, or show up in love and solidarity for this moment. Just laying it out there for us. Now, getting back to the man of the hour, Paul. I've known Paul for some years. I was at once a burgeoning rapper who failed somewhat miserably, but
still a rapper.
still rapping.
It never dies.
But it started with me trying to get Paul's attention through music, because I admired his literary work so much. As a person who I think has been writing about hip hop for years, and has been not just an admirer, but actual participant within the culture. It got to the point where I started writing essays, and some of those essays on Medium.com had started kind of picking up traction. And I can't remember, I could be wrong, but I feel like Paul had either commented on something or shared something, and I think that kind of started us having conversations. And I remember him meeting me at a coffee shop when I was dead broke, working at this agency that was paying me crumbs, and us just talking for like 2.5 hours. Like I was late for my lunch, and it didn't really matter. Paul invited me on his Couch Sessions podcast, and we had this really broad, big conversation about work. And when I look at the trajectory of our work and our careers, what I've admired most about Paul and his work is, again, his admiration for the culture, but also his dedication to the culture. And then also, too, his friendship as a man, as a father. I think that work kind of shows itself in this book. And so I just want to take a moment to, again, round of applause for Paul for the journey.
Yeah! Thank you for that introduction, and thanks everybody for coming out. This is like the first in-person thing. We have Rob Cantor in the house. Rob wrote Biography of Nipsey Hussle, and we were just talking about how he was not able to do any in-person events for that, and that was such a huge hit. And somebody I looked up to, so I'm glad that everybody was able to come out here and be in person for this. So thank everybody for that.
So, well, I mean, we might bounce around a little bit of going through some of these questions, but I think we've kind of set an order, and so we'll start with the first. And bear with us, some of it, we might go on tangents. I think that part of this is just like sitting with the energy in the room, right? Two New York kids having some shit-talking conversations about hip-hop, which is always fun. Paul, you set the tone early on in the book, right? For those who have not read, like the way Paul kind of journeys us through Mac Miller's story, he starts in Pittsburgh, as opposed to jumping right into Mac's story. It's really a picturesque POV of the world of Pittsburgh leading up to the moments that Mac Miller was born. Why was it so important for you to start there?
Well, I mean, writing about hip hop, right? Really writing about anybody, or even talking about anybody, we say they're a product of their environment. So you need to understand where a person comes from to really understand where they've gone. Pittsburgh is a city that some people are familiar with, other people may not be, but perhaps your perception is like through the Steelers or something where you recognize it as like a hard-working blue-collar town, right? And that's sort of the bird's eye view of it, right? But then you gotta get like hyper-specific. Here's a person who grew up in a sort of semi-suburban part of the city, didn't live in the suburbs, right? Lived in a kind of leafy area that was sort of the product of a gentry that found that place to be, a place where they could relax and stuff after hard work elsewhere in Pittsburgh in the 1800s, right? And that leads to the development of that community. so I was really fascinated by that because as you read in the book, I was one of the people who was being set Max Music early on before he was signed, dating back to before anybody really knew who he was. There was always this a little bit of a question around him of just like, is he just like some rich suburban white kid, right? And when I got to Pittsburgh and I started really walking the streets, I said, well, there's some element of that here, right? But that's complicated, right? Because you walk 5 minutes from where he lives and all of a sudden you're in, a much different environment, right? And that's like growing up in that really nice area that's in, some people maybe live in Brooklyn or, more suburban parts of the Bronx understand that, Queens, right? And so that's why I did that. And Pittsburgh also has really interesting history of, the robber barons, right? And these people who built America. And then, more specifically, in recent times, you have somebody like Mr. Rogers, whose house was nearby. What do we associate Mr. Rogers with? Positivity and feelings and everyone's got value and all these things we associate with really innocent childhood, right? And I just was like, wow, person's in hip hop, right? Which is, often at that time, I'm not talking about now. This is like maybe around the time you get a Drake starting to blow up. We were coming out of, and we talk about this in the book, sort of that alpha era, right? And I just thought this was an interesting person in this alpha space. And the emotionality of what he ended up doing and where he came from, all that was linked back to that stuff of growing up in the shade of Mr. Rogers, right? So that's why I did that.
And I love that because, like, even while you were talking, it made me think about, like, for those who maybe New Yorkers are familiar with New York, I grew up in the Bronx, Fordham Road, 188, and Crescent Avenue, which, like, right across the street from my mom's crib is like, a halfway house. You can walk maybe 4 or 5 blocks over. Fordham Road shifts a little bit depending on where you are in Brooklyn. Is similar, and so I think that connection, right, of like, it doesn't really matter what city you're in. There's like those parts of like you're in the suburb, and then if you make a right turn, you're no longer in the suburb, and some fuck shit might go down. Like, that's the environment I think that Paul's doing so masterfully to create for us in the early stages of the book, where you're like, oh, okay, now all of this is kind of connecting, and it also allows, I think, us to feel more centered around like how Mac's experience shaped the art that he was making. So thank you for that, Paul. This next question, and we kind of talked about this on the phone before this conversation, but you started at the end to tell this story, right? The ending is kind of the beginning here, right? And then there's this notion, and this really, I think, magical way you tend to pull stories out of these folks that you're interviewing, right? And then you're crafting a narrative around all of that work. With the creation of this book, like, what did an outline look like for you? I know it was very purposeful for you, right, to kind of start at the end in order to create the story, but if you could just walk us through how an outline potentially looked like what was that process for you, and even what was that day-to-day approach to the work that essentially landed us in this room?
I mean, day-to-day was like pushing a boulder up a hill. It's like a marathon. It's 3 years of just every day, getting in front of that computer and, making those calls, right? Journalism is fucking hard work. That's why so few people do it. It's like, you gotta call people and have difficult conversations. Hey, bro, you don't know me at all, right? I never met you a day in my life, but I'm doing this thing, or I'm trying to do this thing. This is a thing that happened, like, this is what it is, like, do you want to take part in it, right? That's difficult, it's tough to call people and have those talks, right? Just getting someone to answer their phone or a text, or, it's tracking people down, getting contacts. As anybody knows, worked in magazines or any of these types of things, it's like, and it's like a black box, like just trying to figure out what's going on. There was somebody he's not in the book, right? But Pharrell, for example, right, who I was trying to interview. You're lucky if you can get in touch with Pharrell, let alone get him to say, I don't want to take part in it, right? You know what I mean? Like, but just the fact, by the way, which had nothing to do with me. It was a yes until it was a no. Politics. But anyway, so there wasn't, but to answer the question about the outline, there really wasn't an outline. Because as a journalist, you're at the mercy of what you get, right? You're at the mercy of the story. You submit yourself to the story that's in front of you. I couldn't start anywhere that where starting didn't make sense. The book only starts, 3/4 to the end because everyone started talking to me about that, right? I forgot about that incident that starts the book. I literally didn't ask anybody about it, right? I went in to do these interviews and it was like, because it was never made an issue. By the way, we're talking about this car accident that. Shh. By the way, that's my kid, so I can do that.
Nobody else do
But the okay, it's all right. Lila's doing her Lila thing. As all parents know. Yeah. But you're at the mercy of what what you get when you're interviewing people, right? And you don't go in with an agenda necessarily. There is no outline, right? So I forgot about that. We're talking about how the book begins, right? It begins with this DUI that I forgot. I'm not saying I forgot about it necessarily, but it was kind of like not top of mind, right? In questioning. But people just kept talking about this thing, right? And it kept bringing it up, like, you have DUI, man, like, you got that DUI. And it was after like 10 or 12 people brought it up that I was like, okay, this seems like a little bit of a sore subject that nobody wants to talk about, so let's go there, right? Like, what's the elephant in the room? Let's just get it out of the way, right? And then, you think the book's going one way and then it goes the other, right? Now it's all of a sudden you're in fucking 1755 and learning about the coal industry, right? And Andrew Carnegie, and you're like, I thought I was going to tell everyone about. I tell everyone this is the only book that goes from Andrew Carnegie to Ariana Grande. Right?
Like U.S. history and pop culture. U.S. history and pop culture.
Yes. U.S. history and pop culture in one. Yes, absolutely. But no outline, bro. Like it was a freestyle. Yeah.
It was a freestyle. Bro, that is so impressive to me, man. And I think also for those who might be writers, aspiring writers, and cemented writers in the game, I think so often we make this big deal about having an outline, like you need an outline in order to help guide the work, and I love that. Honestly, that helps me a lot, because when I think about even my process, I generally don't have an outline, and I felt really bad about not having outlines. I kind of freestyle and then reshift shit as it fits. So hearing that from you was helpful.
I mean, sometimes you have to write 750 words to get a sentence that makes sense, right? Because you don't even know where you're going with it. You're like, okay, what did I do? For example, the book is 110,000 words. It could have been 180,000 words, right? Nobody's seeing the 70,000 that got taken out, right? Because I was just like, all right, we're talking a little too much about this here. We're going a little too long here. Like, nobody gives a shit about this, right? And I'm bored, ultimately, right, you're at the mercy of is somebody gonna check out here, and finding ways to be, it's an economy of words. My journalism professor was here, Frederick Kaufman.
That's
Shout
what's
out to him.
What's up?
It's a CUNY Graduate Center, yeah, what's up? And you gotta find a way to get rid of all the extra shit. Just write a simple sentence. He was here. This happened. Who, what, when, where, and why. Don't give me a think piece about it. Don't tell me what you feel. Just get to the meat and potatoes. What was happening, and how did it go down? And that is how do I strip out all the things I'm thinking about? So if you notice in the book, I'm not even in the book, right? There's no I or anything. The only time I am in the book is when I actually had something to do with the story, which was potentially, reviewing an album or somebody sending me music. But I'm not in it. I made a great effort to make a work of journalism. I didn't have any interest in telling my story in this book. This was like a submission to the person to elevate them and bring them where, I felt that they deserved, to be. Yeah.
I love that, and honestly, you just made me want to ask a question that's not necessarily here, but what I'm hearing from you was discernment too, right? Like this idea that we can be open and honest about the work and be completely objective, right? Like I think you just removed yourself from the process of like, does this work or does this not work? And I think some of my favorite biographers and biographies do that, right? We talked about Becoming Richard Pryor, we talked about Heavier Than Heaven. Like, were there any biographies that inspired you going into this process at all, that not even necessarily guided the work, but kind of gave you a template of like, oh, I fuck with this. This is kind of the direction I want to go into. And if not, no, that's completely fine.
There wasn't a specific one. I picked up a lot of biographies to learn how people were doing things. Like I would pick up something like The Power Broker, but couldn't finish that. I get like 50 pages in and just kind of check out. Like all right, Robert Moses, bad guy, I get it. I don't know. Actually, there was I mentioned Paul Cantor because at the time he was working on his book, right? And maybe had I had his book to look at, I would have had a little bit more of a blueprint. But we ended up just sort of powwowing about our dual projects. I remember talking to him when he was starting his, which was also a very hard book to write. And we were like kind of like, how are you doing this? I don't fucking know, you know what I'm saying? Like there wasn't really a blueprint for how to do it with hip hop, right? And the ones that did exist were sort of old, right? There was Cheo Adari Coker had done a book on the Notorious B.I.G. many years ago. But really this was like a space that there was nothing, right? I wouldn't say it was nothing, but it was. You had Dan Charnas, who just put out, his book, Dilettante, right? That was a big book that was seen as a model, but I only had I was dealing with one character, right? So a lot of what I was looking at was like Aristotle, poetics. I looked more to Greek literature than anything modern. That was more the model. What is, what's the structure for that story? There is a structure to the book if you really are looking at it, That was not intentional, it revealed itself, It's like Michelangelo says, I chiseled away at the man in the sculpture until I set him free.
I love this because even with that quote, and even how you described it, now rereading the book as a Greek tragedy is going to be something I'm going to have to hone into because essentially it is. Mm-hmm. Like if you're being inspired by the Greek poetics, there's nothing more tragic than the story of this fallen angel and how he's become and how he fell.
Well, it was important because the story was very sad, and I was extremely depressed writing this book. I was going through a lot, because when you interview all these people, you're doing 100 interviews, you got 100 people in your head, right? So you got all these stories people are trying to tell you, then you got the person you're writing about, then you got some political shit that has nothing to do with you going on, right? Then you have your life itself, being a father and a husband, you have COVID, right? There was a lot, that was going on, and it was a battle with myself to do it. It was a very sad story. So I wanted to acknowledge, right, in the telling of the story that it is sad, right? There's unbelievable power in acknowledging pain, right? That is only how you heal. If you pretend some shit don't exist, you don't really get anywhere. Right? Everybody knows that. Who never sat in a therapist's chair knows how that goes, right? So you gotta just get it out there, right? And let's talk about it, and let's just figure it out. However, the book, as anybody who's picked it up knows, is primarily an origin story, right? If this man is a superhero to you, well, let's see how he became who he became, right? And that's really what the book is. You know, at least 75% of it is that. And then you kind of go into this other stuff that is more well-known, more publicized, a little bit more of the tabloidy version of whatever, you know, he was. And that was an intention, like, let's get to, because I knew I had been sent this guy's music, like 2008, 2009. I was sitting there watching this little white kid rapping into a thing, blah, blah, blah. You know how many, he was you, trying to get my attention. He was you, right? How can I get Paul to look at my shit, right? And I looked at it and was like, this is good, right? I like it, you know what I mean? He did get a lot of, there was a lot of hate early on in his career. I didn't have a lot of the baggage that other people had for whatever fucking reason. I don't think that had anything to do with color or skin, nothing. I just, the same way you out on the stage with me is like, I didn't know who you were, I just saw your words, right? The power of your ideas is what got you here. Not who you work for or who you know. That doesn't go anywhere with me. You know, I don't care about that. You know, I want the best person to do the thing. You know, so he was a guy who was proficient in his craft, and you could see it at an early age. Like, this guy is good, you know? And that, I was like, okay, this ended like this, right? And people have this idea about who this person is, right? Anybody, you know, any tragic story get the same thing, you know, drug overdose, this, blah, blah, blah. It's like, all right, it's a lot deeper than that. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you even get to that position? How does a person even pick up a drug, right? What turns you on to that, right? Like, and then what does the extent of that look like? Is it really an addiction? We talk about that endlessly in the book, right? Is it a lifestyle? Is it, where's the line? How do we even speak about these things, right? We say it's struggling with substance abuse. Like, what is the language we use? So all that stuff was at play, yeah.
Thank you for that, Paul. So you kind of touched on this earlier, and the humanity of the work, and I think part of this is also looking at and examining the humanity of the author. I think so often we can pick a book off the shelf and we are drawn into these magical, mythical worlds, some of them fictional, some of them non-fictional. But it's really easy to forget that there's a person who's actually crafting the work, who has a life, who has a family, who has children. My question to you, and like as a person who's a friend and also a father and a girl dad at that, you know, we had some intimate conversations about the other shit that's not important for this conversation, but how you showed up for this work. Did being a father affect anything at all with how you were able to navigate this space? Looking at it from the angle of a father who sees a person who, for all intents and purposes, might have one day become a father himself. Did fatherhood play any role at all in with regards to the creation of this book?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, as anybody who's a father knows, or a motherhood, fatherhood, whatever you want to call it nowadays, motherhood. Be it, you know, having children unlocks a series of emotions that exist inside you that you don't even know are there, which I didn't understand, right? I became a father while I was doing this. So I was seeing him as a child, and trying, and not just him, but there's many people in this book who I try to treat as children. Not because I was trying to belittle them or anything like that. You know, it wasn't like anything. It was more like, you know, to be honest, when you get 100 people on the record, they start talking shit about each other. They all like, fuck this guy, he stole money, blah, 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 he fucked this up, and everybody starts pointing the finger at each other, right? And it's very easy to write that version of the book, you know, and start placing blame. Right, which is, you know, it was there, right? But when it came time to put it together, I saw everybody who that was happening with, and I said, this person was a child. Some of them were fathers, some of them were mothers. So I said, I'm not going to do you like that, you know, because I just don't believe in that. That's not what I stand for, you know. So even if this guy did, what's his agenda? Why are he telling me this person stole his money or this, that, and the third? Like, you know, so I had to see the agendas too. That was also at play, right? Not everybody that talks to you is that honest, you know? Like some people want more credit than other people. I did this, I did that. Like, I don't know, did you, bro? Like, you spend months just trying to vet if somebody's bullshitting you. You know, you gotta call another person and say, hey, did this guy really do this thing he's saying he did? Oh no, he didn't do that. What the fuck is he talking about? You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't even there, you know? Cause like, you know, with this, you know, hip hop shit is like a lot of legends, right? It's like, I was there. You know what I mean? I was there at the basement when Cool Herc did this, and they're like, okay. You know what I'm saying? I don't know about that, you know? So it was a lot of that, right? And, but yes, I totally, you know, I definitely took, you know, fatherhood played a huge role in this, and obviously I was super thankful that I was a father. I don't know if this would have been maybe a different book if I wasn't. Just in my level of tolerance for, you know, whatever was going on around it and all that shit, you know, even some of that I had to look at people as children on, you know. Everybody's a little baby to me, basically. Yeah. Little baby.
Not
Yeah.
like done.
Yeah, and I know some little babies who act, you know, more mature than the big ones. But anyway, it's kind of complicated.
Another conversation.
Yeah.
I think, and I'll skip one of these questions because I think it's not relevant here. But this, while reading this felt very much like, and we joke about Cool Herc, but this did feel somewhat like history, story of Mac Miller, but then also a very broad but somewhat introspective look at hip hop history in general and the context and frame in which that fits in. Was that intentional, and if so, why was that important to tell this story, do you think?
Well, I mean, I often say that Mac is like probably one of the few artists you could say started his career almost like Vanilla Ice and ended it like Eminem, right? You gotta understand, like, this is a white guy operating in a primarily black space, right? And how do you get to that point, right? So it was important to kind of isolate on like Vanilla Ice and say, what happened here? How did this guy handle controversy, and why was there so much pushback to whatever he was doing? By the way, Vanilla Ice does shows now for like 20,000 people, but that's a side story. You know, gets a lot of money to perform Ice Ice Baby in front of adoring crowds, which you would never have, you know, suspected looking at that history. But then, like, you see this sort of, actually there's a section in the book which I actually want to open up on just for a second, right? Because I want to talk about that, right? The Eminem thing, you know, comes up. And we have in the book Wendy Day, right? Wendy Day is, you know, an iconic person in hip hop, helped negotiate like the Cash Money deal, deal for like Twista, all these people still active, you know, hustling. And the day she meets Eminem, she's at like a convention in Detroit, and Eminem tries getting her attention, and she basically ignores him. By the way, she's white. And she says, we're there with Rhymefest, who co-wrote Jesus Walks, a lot of music for Kanye, who's also in the news with Mac Miller lately, unfortunately. And Eminem was trying to get her attention, and she says, as soon as he told me that it was a white rapper, I kind of shut down. I knew how difficult it was to get a deal for a white rapper. Impossible. When the cypher ended, Rhymefest came over. Rhymefest now, he's a black guy. You gotta hear this kid rap, he said. But they couldn't give any less of a fuck. She took the kid's demo, thought little of it, and shuttled off into the car. Now Day and Rhymefest were speeding down the highway, headed to Denny's. Let's listen to the tape, Rhymefest implored, but she didn't want to. White rappers can't rap, she said, and there isn't anything I can do for him. She tossed the tape, this is Eminem's tape, on the car floor, right? They put the tape in, like leave this alone. They put the tape in, she hears them, she's like, wow, this guy's amazing. They go back. Now, you know, she says, get in the car. She works with him in earnest for a year or whatever that is, can't get him anything, right? She's like, maybe I can make a little cartoon character for him and not tell people he's white. And then we can like get him a deal. And he'd be like, boom, I'm a white rapper. Right? Like after you heard who I am, right? Which, by the way, is kind of like how some of us heard Eminem. We heard him on Stretchin' Bobbito. And we heard the early version of My Name Is. And you're just like, or Scary Movies with Where's the 5'9", and you're like, what the fuck is this, right? You know, this is in a sea of other music being played, and you don't know that he's white, right? It's only till you open up the source 2 months later, and he's in Unsigned Hype. You're like, whoa, what the hell? This is this guy I've been listening to on the radio every week on Thursday nights at 2 o'clock in the morning is a white guy, right? So now you get to Mac, not as much of that around, right? You know, it's a different environment, but you have to show what that evolution was like, right? And what is the conversation around these guys to really understand how he's either accepted or not accepted, who's regulating on him, Pitchfork being one of those places. That was some like white on white shit, right? That's a white writer saying you don't belong in hip hop, because no shots to this writer, because he was just doing his job as all writers need to do. He's like, you don't belong in this culture. Why not, right? Now, this is a week after they had just shitted on Donald Glover, right? They gave Donald Glover, who we can't say, I mean, he's not part of the culture, right? They gave him like a 1.6. Now, a week later, they give Mac a 1.0. So they're saying these two guys, one's a white guy, one's a black guy from Stone Mountain, Georgia, right? Doesn't fit the mold. They're not hip hop, right? They don't belong. Why? Because is your version of hip hop a cartoon version of it? Right? Is it this version of it that is like, Lil Yachty or whoever, you know what I'm saying? Like somebody making, something that you think is funny, right? So I kind of like felt like Matt was like keeping it very real, right? So Blue Slide Park is an album that got shitted on. But that album's fairly authentic to who he was. So here's a person who's doing the complete opposite of what the white rapper thing was, which was like, let's front, be hard, blah, blah, blah. He's like, I'm gonna be authentically myself. And then a person says, fuck that, I'm gonna negate your life. And basically, write this review that is a very personal type of thing, and if you're a kid, that can fucking destroy you, you know what I'm saying? Like, it can destroy you if you're an adult, but to be 19 years old and you don't got a guest on your album and it's all Pittsburgh and you're representing for your town, that's gotta be painful. So that was a long-winded answer to that question, sorry.
This is the Paul show, so thank you for that. I think you touched on a few different things, and part of what I wasn't gonna ask this question, but because you kind of touched the surface here, like I have a list of artists. B.O.B., Asher Roth, Charles Hamilton, Emilio Rojas, Torre, Skyzoo, Mickey Fax, Blue, Wale, XV, Big Sean, Pat Div, right, Donis, the Cool Kids, Lupe, J. Cole, Drake. There's a lot of folks who came up in this era, Mac Miller of the blog era, if you will, Two Dope Boys, Nah Right, On Smash, you know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of these spaces that were creating opportunities for these artists, and you touch on this, and for me it was very nostalgic, because as an underground MC who was reared in that era, but also reared in the golden era of hip hop, that was a very magical time, especially for folks who were like, fuck the labels, there is no labels, the blogs are really helping to guide and direct the music. How important do you think the timing of Mac's rise coinciding with the blog era, what was to his career?
I mean, I think one thing that you see in the book that we talk about, right, he was speaking directly to his fans almost as soon as he could do it.
And very early, like before anybody else.
Yeah, right. I mean, in the book, we talk about, it's kind of mind-blowing to think that, like, Kanye had a blog, right? And he would just write on it, right? J. Cole had a blog, right? This is a guy who doesn't do an interview now, right? But he was like, had a blog, like, yeah, I'm working on this, you know what I'm saying? Like, hope you check it out. So blogging wasn't necessarily new, but these guys were using it to just speak to their fans. So that was the first thing. YouTube was also something that I think Mac, isolated on, right? He had the channel Tree J TV, which everyone associated with him. They didn't know that was like his boy Tree J, right? Who's in the book, by the way, never been interviewed. But he had this idea, like, let's make this a hub, right? It wasn't necessarily a new idea because people had those hubs, but to actually sit there and continue making shit, right? Which is what the blogs were about. The blogs were, how can I gain your attention? Well, how do you get anyone's attention? Everybody who's in here probably knows, you have to continue posting constantly, right? You have to keep updating your page and blah, blah. You take a little, you dip out, people be like, where the fuck did you die? Like, what's going on, right? He was doing that with music. When I reach a million followers on Twitter, I got a mixtape for you, right? I'm just gonna keep flooding these blogs, right? I'm gonna keep working. Right? It was like, that was a thing that I felt, he was able to take advantage of, but it wasn't because it was partially because he worked hard, but all those people you mentioned worked hard too. What made him any different? He just had this special something about him that made people connect to him. And we talked a lot in the book about charisma and X Factor and what, like when somebody just has that thing, right? That you see them and you're like, I don't know what it is about this fucking person, but I just like them, you know what I mean? Or I don't like them, right? Sometimes that magical thing can be a thing where you're like, man, I'm just not feeling how this guy, little kid is moving, and it's like he just seems to be having way too much fun, and it's happening way too easy. Fuck this kid, So that was also a part of it, right? I think he just had an X factor. And you can see, with BD, right, his first rhyme partner. They're in a group together. And BD is a great rapper. I just listened to his new album. He just sent it to me. I even think his music now is great. But he just didn't have what Mac had. It was just slightly different, right? He was probably on paper a better rapper, right? He was bar for bar better. But he didn't have that thing that was like inside of him, which is that it factor. Right? It's like, I don't know what this is, but, I just want to pay attention to it,
You made me think of there's a mention when Earl and Mac are talking about Billy coming into a space and just like out-rapping the fuck out of them, right? But like, you have all these opportunities and spaces with folks who have maybe been grinding longer than Mac, but weren't able to make the type of impact that he had, and I think he kind of wrapped that up really nicely, so appreciate you, bro. You have a lot of interviews in this book. Was there anyone that was your favorite and why? I mean, you interviewed Shot Money, you're talking to some big names in hip hop, but then also too, talking to some important folks, I think within the world of Mac, but then within the framework of Pittsburgh. Was there anyone that stood out to you the most and why?
I mean, the thing about interviews is they're all puzzle pieces, whether it's a big person or a small person. You could get something, there was something that made it into the book from just some man on the street thing in Pittsburgh. I was just in the neighborhood and I just asked him a question and he gave me a little bit of info, offhand, and I just threw that in there, and it was this is a little piece of this jigsaw puzzle, we're gonna just throw it in there because it feels right, It's like a grace note on a piano, It's we can all play it, but once you hit that, you're ooh, I get bluesy now, and so it's one of those types of things. I really thought that a lot of his close friends, those were very hard interviews to do, sometimes 6, 7, 8 hours sitting there. Some of these guys had their own really fascinating stories and journeys through the music business and life itself, with some of the subjects that are, played a part in Mac's story. And so we would talk about that. Bill, who we just mentioned, he had a drug problem, right? And him and Mac were bonded over that, right? They were, obviously they were roommates too, for a period of time, obviously close childhood friend. but they bonded over like keeping their time, you know, how many days clean they were, right? And not to give the whole book away, but you know, Mac talks a lot in the book about how he uses other people to express himself. Being a producer allows him to express an idea without speaking. He uses other people as a vessel. The last song he ever produced in his life was for this kid Bill, right? Who was making an EP, which I saw you actually showing some love to.
Yes. No.
Yeah. And he was like, you know, they were in two different places, and this was towards the end of Mac's life, you know, it might have been 2 weeks before he passed away, you know, and he was like, I'm making this thing, and it's all about addiction and my struggle, and I need you to just give me something, man. And he had been asking him, and Mac said, I love you, I got you, give me 5 minutes. He goes and he makes the beat, he sends it to him. You know, and then it winds up being this really great record. I heard just offhand. I didn't even know he was going to do an interview with me. I was just listening to it. I was like, this kid's amazing, right? I listened to the EP. I was like, Jesus Christ, this kid's rapping his fucking ass off. You know, and I was kind of blown away that nobody knew who he was. I was like, nobody knows who this rapper is. Yeah. Like, I was like, wow, you know, this is really, really interesting stuff. You know, crazy, you know, rhyme patterns. And so, again, it was more like about just the skill. I was like, whoa. So those guys, his DJ, Clockwork, you know, this is a person probably who had one of the most intimate relationships with him musically because he's the one on stage. He goes from doing a show for $250 and a bottle of Hennessy in Cincinnati to, you know, 20,000 people in Lollapalooza in Chile, right? And he's the guy on stage, and he's also responding to the changes in the crowd. So, you know, he's the DJ, I'm the rapper, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, he could kind of see, like, when Donald Trump came out, he was like, all right, I'm a DJ. He was High-Tech's DJ, right? So, not High-Tech, he had been DJing for High-Tech and Talib Kweli. And when they did their second Reflection Eternal album, and he was coming off that. So he started DJing for Mac, and he saw that what Mac's audience was like and how the people responded to certain records. But he's also a nightlife DJ, right? And, you know, he's just playing records for the crowd. You know how you warm up, and he could see, like, when Macadelic comes, Donald Trump, he's like, oh, the crowd is responding a lot different to this now, right? These records are sounding a lot more contemporary. I could play these songs, like, this is not just like a guy on the internet. This is like, I could play this in a mix now. I could go into like a little trap set and drop this record, right? And it's moving, and it's not just because it's Mac Miller, right? It's just because it's a dope record, yeah.
Well, how are we doing on time? This quick time check, I want to make me good, sweet, awesome, because I got a few more questions that I know.
How's everybody feeling? Do you want us to continue, or should we already?
Let's go.
We'll get back to the alcohol. Important things.
So, you and I had a conversation about this, and just for background, I come from, my father was a schizophrenic, bipolar disorder, PTSD, also suffered from alcohol dependence. So I did a lot of work also too in the nonprofit space with regards to working with folks who are coming home from incarceration, and also those who've been suffering from mental health issues alongside coinciding alcohol and substance abuse issues. And so substance abuse, drug addiction is a space that I'm pretty well versed in. And so part of the issue, it was, let me use my words carefully here, enabling. Enabling was a topic and a theme I think that kind of came up a lot in this book. And I think you do such a really great job of not pointing fingers at people, but more or less giving us an opportunity to examine how others in Mac's life either didn't step in or halfway stepped in, or when they stepped in, didn't really confront the issues. There was a conversation, and I think a very casual conversation you had with Robert Glasper, and shout out to Robert, phenomenal musician and artist. But when he starts talking about creativity and how it seems in this conversation, creativity takes a front seat towards it takes the front seat over a person's well-being and health. Like there's some drug shit going on, whatever, but it's more about like, yo, I don't want to interrupt your process. And I think that stance is a stance that's generally taken in hip-hop, in entertainment in general, whether it be hip-hop, whether it be pop. Like drug use tends to run rampant. It tends to be a thing that we celebrate. In certain drugs, like I'm an advocate for marijuana, for all things natural. Just putting it out there, but also like when we start talking about some of the heavy, more dangerous drugs. My question to you then becomes, why do you think the industries are shaped in this way, where essentially there feels like, to me, and folks, you can check me if you think I'm wrong here, there seems to be a nurturing of drug abuse rather than a very protective, proactive stance to eliminate it?
Okay, there's a couple ways, it's a couple answers to that question. One, let me just go to the Robert Glasper thing for a second because we're talking about it, right? Because, you know, everybody looks at the Mona Lisa and sees something different. So the enabling thing was never a thing, like that was your read, but that's actually the first time I heard that. You know, Glasper says, I let him do his thing. It was just studio shit. You know, cats just do their shit. They just have to have their vices and the things they do, and when you're creating, I'm never one to jump in the way when someone's creating and doing that shit because that's what they need to do to create. If it would have seemed like he was going overboard and it was too much, and I got scared or something, then I'd say, hey bro, I think you've had enough. But it didn't get there. He was just high, right? What do people remember about Mac Miller? Right? What are people going to be playing, right? Are they going to be playing a bunch of memes on the internet? No, they're going to be playing the music, right? That's what the artist leaves behind. Whatever they need to do to get that shit on the canvas, they got to get the paint up there, right? An artist, whether you're writing or painting or making music, or even if you're just, you know, your art is making a drink, right? You got to do what you need to do to get that thing out of you. And all of us, I think, are at war with ourselves, whether that's self-doubt or, you know, am I supposed to be doing this? Am I good enough? You're trying to find things to talk about too, right? Faces is this great mixtape that Mac Miller has, and a lot of it is just about doing drugs, right? And those struggles with it, right? So it becomes a subject matter. Like the subject becomes the content itself. I'm sorry, the action becomes the content itself, right? So I don't know if music industry is that much different than any other industry. If you don't show up for work, right? I mean, and you said, I want to take a mental health day, right? And how many days can that go on, right? Eventually they're going to be like, bro, you got to get your shit together or get the fuck out of here. you know, like there's not a lot of sympathy for that, right? So if you're a musician, it's a very competitive business, right? And you got to get out there. Most people, you know, who are online critics, whatever, readers, writers, whatever the fuck, never did that travel, right? The grind. We talk in the book a lot about just the grind of the road, right? Even sitting here, you know, I've been doing so much prep to come here. I was like, I need some cocaine. Never did cocaine in my life. I was like, I don't understand why this guy does this shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, like, I was like, man, I need something. You know, pick me up. You know what I mean? Like, you know, it's just because you got to go out there, and if you don't give 110%, the audience doesn't show up anymore, right? But then there's that line of when does it become too much, right? When is it affecting your performance? That is also a subject in the book of like, okay, you're maybe doing a little too much, and it's actually influencing how people are seeing you in the crowd, right? The show's not that good. You know, because you're a little too high, right? Like you've crossed over from that. You know, I'm doing it to create and get energized to like this is just a bad habit now. But yeah, man, it's all about like getting it, you know, on the page, right? And it's all about getting that voice on that record. So whatever he needed to do it. I don't think Robert Glasper was wrong for what he did, you know, just that's a fact, right? Like how I feel, you know. I didn't want to judge him for it. As a person who's been in the studio, I used to own studio. I own 2 studios. I've seen every kind of thing you could think of in that studio, you know? Like crazy stuff, you know what I'm saying? And you're just like, but listen to this record. You know, I'm not saying it's healthy, but I'm saying like, people are gonna play the record over, right? Whether you know, live or die, it just becomes the shit people tweet about, you know? Like, which is a whole nother, you know, like a whole nother problem, but nobody cares, you know, unfortunately, yeah.
I think that's kind of what I was trying to get to. It's like, at the end of the day, we want art. I don't care what you do for your art, as long as you give me art. And I think what I think this book does.
Am I entertained, right?
Right, yeah.
This is a fucking TV show to people, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Somebody that, I didn't use this quote in the book, but somebody that was interviewed for it said, the saddest thing about Mac's story is that when he was all fucked up, is this thing I liked the most about him. That was the period I liked the most. He said, what does that say about me? Like, I'm like this person, I'm literally the person that was contributing to this, that when he was doing this like thing that was not that, I was like, whatever. But all of a sudden, he's talking about, you know, doing heroin and stuff. I think that's amazing, right? What does that say about me? What does that say about our industry? But, you know, like, there's nothing you can do about it because music goes in your ears, not your eyes, right? You can see it, and you can think it's wrong, but if it sounds good, you're like, all right, man, like, this is what it is. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question, so I guess I'll just skip to the end, and I'll just read what I wrote here while my daughter calls me on Amazon Alexa. I will call her back. The book is a beautiful and honest remembrance of Mac and keeping to the integrity of journalism. You've done a masterful job of balancing your duties as a diligent reporter, but also telling a very nuanced and layered story of a complicated but very special human, which is absolutely true. If you haven't read the book, please do so. Buy it now. What do you think readers and fans and non-fans are like myself, a fan of Mac Miller? What do you think folks who are showing up for Mac, for Malcolm, can take away from reading this book? What would you want them to take away from reading this book?
Well, Mac talked about this a lot in his life, that nobody was all one thing. That they weren't all good or bad, they weren't always happy all the time, you know, they weren't always sad. It was a kaleidoscopic experience that, you know, made up who a person was, and a lot of what he was trying to do was capture that on record, give people multiple sides. He has a whole album that's about, you know, love and sex, right? It's not even really necessarily a rap album, right? I mean, there's some rapping on it, but, you know, he was trying to do different things, right? So what I hope people can take from it is that I painted with the full, you know, palette of colors. I made use of everything that was presented to me or that I could get access to. And, you know, I think ultimately this was a guy who believed in himself, right? Because that's where it starts. I have something to say, and I need to make you, you know, aware of it. He was a really talented guy who believed if he just led with his passion, that all the naysayers and people who doubted him and people who maybe had mixed opinions on him would kind of understand like where he was coming from. A motif in the book is I didn't like this guy and then I met him, or I didn't like this guy and then I listened to his music, right? And I think that's a lot of how this book is, you know. It's like maybe you have an opinion on it, right? And you open it up, you're like, shit, this is pretty good. Not what I was expecting. You know what I'm saying? Literal definition of don't judge a book by its cover. You know, a little bit of a cliche, but very apparent here. It was a great thing, you know, when the book came out to see it on the shelf with some heavy stuff. I mean, you know, it was on the shelf with biographies of Anne Frank, Malcolm X. You know, trying to think of some other, Ernest Shackleton, great explorer. John Mellencamp. You know, when you do a thing like this, you know, you elevate a person. When you know, write about somebody, you turn them into something, right? And that's how we push culture forward and people build on what you did. Just there was a lot of research that went into the book, right? I built on what other people did, right? Even this cover, the picture is from a New York Magazine shoot. Greg Jenkins wrote a great piece on that short before he passed away, right? The cover came from that. He was with them when he took that shot, right? We utilized it, we took it and turned it into something else, and that's how knowledge builds, and that's how you create a body of work that lasts. And that's it. You know what I'm saying? Like stories and histories are ever evolving. So I hope somebody picks this up and say, I like this. I'm going to do my own Mac Miller book. I'm inspired. I'm going to do something on somebody else, right? And whatever. That's what I hope people take from it. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Cantor. We're open for asking questions, right? So real quick, please ask questions. I love y'all. I don't want to diatribe about like what Mac Miller did. Like I love it, but let's get into the questions, right? Questions. So anybody questions? We have sweet. Do you want to pass the mic or yeah?
Hi, my name is Kyra. I just had a question regarding when you were finishing up this project. We hear a lot about actors saying that they have a hard time detaching when they play a really deep role. Just as a human in general and knowing Mac personally, did you have a hard time detaching from all the research you were doing and all the interviews and just like really getting deep into who Mac was?
200%. I'm still trying to detach. One of the reasons why I'm like all my social media, everything's like private is because I just want to let this thing be what it is and let, like I did so much thinking about it, when I commit to something, I go into it fully. I can't get halfway pregnant with it, So it's like, we're going to do it, like, let's do it, let's really have the difficult conversations and let's really think it over. And, it's been very difficult. I'm trying to do the Adam Driver thing where, I just read a quote where he's like, I do a thing and I just fucking move on. I don't even do any press, nothing. I'm just like, on to the next thing, right? And I'm trying to do that. But, something about when you love something, right, you hold on to it, right? I think that also speaks to how I felt about, like, if I wasn't, maybe it would be a different book, right? I'm grateful that it is staying with me because there's a lot of things worth having within you. Like sometimes I have just a little life situation now, and like, Matt said this, I'm gonna handle it like that guy. You know what I mean? Particularly like one specific thing is just he had a lot of grace, and that comes up repeatedly in the book. Never beef with anybody. He goes to that writer that shitted on him at Pittsburgh. This didn't make it in the book, by the way. They wind up doing another story. They wind up becoming friends, right? This is the guy who drove him to the depression and all this stuff, right? And he's into all these drugs because of this fucking review. This guy, he's at the airport one day. Who walks up to him? This is like 5 years later. Mac Miller taps him on the shoulder. Yo, what's up? Right? That shows you he was not holding on to any of that baggage, right? And I actually been like, I totally identified with him on that. Just, based on how I move in life, I don't carry any baggage. I just got love for everybody, and like, even if you did me wrong, I still love you, and so, yeah, I'm holding on to it for sure, but it's good, it's all positive.
Yes.
Hi, Paul. I was wondering how you talk a lot about nonfiction and the method of journalism. But how did you manage to do, a story without the main source, and how to kind of like get that Miller spirit without having the ability or the factability to, fact check, but also to kind of like get the sense of if this makes sense for its life, its spirit itself. So you just do it by secondary sources. So how do you manage, to get that, personal spirit without going to the main source?
Well, he did a lot of interviews in his life, right? So there was a lot of, we're talking like thousands of interviews, right? It wasn't like he was like Jay Dillon had 6 interviews, right? Where, he was a person who talked to pretty much anybody who put a, camera in front of his face or a microphone. So there was a lot to go on. I also met him a couple times, right? And we had some exchanges, so on and so forth. So it wasn't like I didn't have any, he was completely out of touch to me, right? He was actually very close, in some sense, even though we weren't like pals. But there's some shows and stuff in here that I talk about. I was at those shows, right? So I remember what those things were like. I was there. The Highlight Ballroom show, I met him, for, I think it was the first time there, after the show. You know what I'm saying? And his crew of people, you know what I mean? But also, secondary source, that's fine, right? Some people see things in you that you don't see in yourself, right? In fact, I'm a big proponent of that, right? Sometimes you can be moseying around the house and your significant other will see something in you that you're not seeing. You're like, man, you seem a little down. I don't feel down. You're like, well, you're acting a little funny. And that's a secondary source, right? You have a warped perception of your own narrative. Everybody's the hero in their own journey, right? You may display some degree of self-awareness, which actually can be disarming in some ways. A person who does a lot of interviews like that, it makes you feel like there's nothing here to tell, right? What do I need this book for? I don't know. I could just go online and watch a YouTube video. Well, most of this stuff is not known. A lot of it is proprietary. That's why there wasn't any information about the book out there until it came out, because I didn't want anybody to leak it. And nobody knew any of this stuff, right? The DUI, for example, right? When he talked about this, it was a non-story. When 10 or 15 other people talked about it, it was a major story, right? It was like, yo. So that's how, you can have 2 different points of view on it, right? If you did a book on Donald Trump, he'll tell you he won the presidency, right? And that just goes to show you that, you can have a flawed view of your own reality. And then you just talk to a million other people and say, was this, you do your due diligence.
That makes me think of, again, we talked about the Richard Pryor book, right? Like, becoming Pryor, people couldn't talk
about Richard Pryor in confidence until he died. There was a lot of things that went unsaid because folks were nervous, people were scared. Not to say that was the same thing with Mac, but I think when you read Paul's book, what you get an understanding of the secondary sourcing actually can amplify the story just as well, which I think is important.
Next question. Yes.
What is something that Mac Miller taught you while you were working on this project?
That's the best question I ever been asked in my life.
Can you repeat the question?
She asked, what is something that Mac Miller taught you while you were working on this book?
Okay.
And I don't know if I'd say he taught me this, but he reinforced it, which was to just, he has a great line in the Song of Conversation. He says, when you're really about it, you don't say shit. And when, people were talking about this book, I said, it's okay, I'm not gonna say anything, right? Because I know I'm really about it. So I don't really need to do any talking about it, I'm not putting up any notes, apologies, or any of this shit that people do. I'm not even part of that, right? Just, you get it and you see what it is. And so I appreciate it because obviously he was a tabloid subject. Towards the end of the last 7, 8 months of his life, he was being followed around by TMZ. And I just didn't think that version of him was real. I was like, what the hell, and I love the fact that he didn't really talk about it. He just let the narrative write itself, even if it was wrong. It was like, I'm gonna speak through my music, and that was his art, and this is mine, so I'm speaking through this. That's what I learned from him, just shut the fuck up and let the work talk.
Wait,
Uh,
yeah, okay. And then Rob,
Hey, how you doing? Just a quick question. Your top 5 white rappers, and is Mac on that list? Thank you. And I want to tell you this. I heard you on the radio with Allison Stewart, and then I got the alert that you were going to be here today. So that's why I'm here. It's good to meet you.
Okay, for everybody who don't know, that's my buddy Peter. He's the first person to ever book Eminem in New York City, right? So, and I'll give you a quick story. He is the one who told me that, Mac had passed away. So, he was there at the beginning of one person's, beginning, and then, like, he was attuned to this other thing, and never, was never like, oh, there's another white guy, fuck him, or anything like that. He loved Mac too, right? Top 5 white rappers. We gotta go with Kid Rock, number 1. Kid Rock. Yeah, I think, Eminem, 1. I would say Mac is number 2. I don't know. Is there a third? Is there a third? Paul Wall, Paul Wall's also a little bit of a subject in this book too, because Paul Wall's, he actually becomes this example of like how to exist in this space, right? It's just like, this is just a cool white guy, right? Like, I had never heard shit about Paul Wall, ever having any issues and this, that, and the third. It was like he was making reels for people. He was like just embraced, right? And Mac talks about him, about Paul Wall, how it was like, that was the first time he had really seen that. It was just like, Paul was just like a cool dude. And he's just chilling, he's really not doing too much, not really, trying too hard. He's just, what he is, a product of his environment. And, yeah, I don't know, man, that's a tough one. I couldn't say, man. It's a short list. Maybe Action Bronson. I like G-Eazy, Logic, who's biracial, dope.
you talk about Bubba Sparks in the book. Does he come up in that list?
Dickie, who's the
Snow, that's what I was saying.
Snow's not the yeah. Just, yeah, I mean,
All the white rappers.
let's just ask this question about the Beastie Boys. I just want to have an honest conversation. Obviously, appreciate the Beastie Boys. Has anyone ever said, "Ad Rock has bars"? For the context of which their records were, but I wouldn't say, I'm not going to say Ad Rock in the Cypher is going to like knock you down, but as its own thing, it was, it was dope, yeah. But, a lot of white rappers, at the end of the day, there are more than people realize.
So we have room for 2. Did you raise I know Rob and my brother. Okay, these 2 right here. Rob and his brother.
Let me go first because this is like a setup. What he said was actually what I was about to say. There's a very reductive, sort of one-sentence version of Mac Miller's life, right? He wrote 110,000 words. You can say white rapper, drug problem, passed away. Right? He's on the cover with his hand over his face. It's a very evocative image. Can you talk about Mac Miller, the musician? Like the Beastie Boys are a band, right? They play music, they do a lot of things. Mac Miller is a talented musician as well, which you get into in the book. Can you just speak to that? Because rapper is, like we've heard Kanye West say, I don't want to be a hip hop artist, just call me an artist. So let's talk about Mac Miller as a maker of music.
He was obviously, he's produced Vince Staples' first mixtape, right? And Vince Staples is, who he is now. He was always a dude who made beats, right? So he was always a producer. I think what's really interesting is that he made beats and actually didn't really push that. And then, he was like, maybe my thing is not good enough, right? Like, I don't need to make my own, like, I can make them, but like, I'll let somebody else do it because they're better than mine, which is like, thinking about, you know, the end result, you know, and less about ego. He was like, let me get out of my own way. But as he became a much better producer, and more confident in what he was doing, Circles, his posthumous album, you can see that he has a lot of records where, you know, they're almost like stream of consciousness, right? And very gonzo, just rapping about something that's in front of him almost like some Ghostface thing, right? And the posthumous album is like the complete opposite of that. It's how can we isolate on an idea and use an economy of words? We'll go back to that, a journalism thing. How can I isolate on a feeling and less of a, you know, I'm gonna rap, right? Like, how can I say more with less? So I think that was something that he was learning how to be almost like a pop songwriter towards the end of his life. And some of those records on Swimming, which, you know, to me is his best album, those aren't even rap songs, you know what I'm saying? They're just dope songs, right? You can just play them as pieces of music, they're compositions, you know? And yeah, they have like a more of a, like an adult sound, right? Very R&B and like almost like a Prince vibe, right? And like that is more illustrative of I think where his head was probably at, you know, towards the end. But you can play piano. Robert Glasper talks about that in the book. He's like, I'm a fucking Grammy-winning pianist, right? And I'm like watching this dude. He's sitting in with me, playing sessions, right? We were doing these gigs in Brooklyn, and Matt would come and play piano, right? Like, that's not really what you think of them as, right? You know, like you said, there's the one sentence thing. It's like, well, you could have walked into Blue Note. Robert Glasper would usually have his Blue Note residency, right? And Matt Miller would be there, right? And be like, I was not expecting that, you know? And he's just being a musician, playing, supporting to Robert Glasper, you know? Who isn't like a classically trained, unbelievable pianist, right? Yeah.
Last question.
Hello. How many hours did you give into writing a book? Like pages per day or week, would you say?
Estimated wise.
I was really fortunate enough that my wife was really helpful with giving me some space to work on it, and time and energy to devote to it. That helped. You know, it's a tough one. Some days you get nothing. A lot of days, nothing. Yeah, nothing. You know, and then I would get these bursts of, I wouldn't even say inspiration, but it was just like, it would just kind of come in waves. I try to be really disciplined as a writer to some degree, but because there's a lot of theories around that. Let me get my 750 words or my 500. And that is helpful for teaching you like some craft, but sometimes when you actually have a thing to do, it's a lot, you know, more difficult to just get it out. Again, you're dealing with, in this book, because I wasn't making it up, it was journalism. You're talking like thousands of pages of transcripts, so sometimes you're just like fishing around for something, you're like, where is this thing? I remember this person saying this to me in this interview, and you're like looking for a needle in a haystack, and you're like, trying to find that little piece of the puzzle. I don't think anybody put the posters here. These fucking people wanted to kill me. We were editing this book. This was like, you know that cliche rapper story? We were going to mastering, and then we had to like do the whole thing over, right? We had to like stop the mastering. That was what happened with this book. This book was literally going to the publisher, and there was an edit. It was like at 1 o'clock it was leaving, and I was adding something to it. I was like, we gotta add this part. I found, you know, one of the pieces. We misspelled his name wrong. All types of shit like that. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, it was like one of those things, and it was hard for me to stop tinkering with it. I would rewrite the whole book right now if I wanted, you know, if I really had the opportunity to. My wife would see me when we got the official copy. I was like, fuck, I did this wrong. Could do this again. Oh man, let's pick it back. Gotta do the whole book over.
Guys, thank you all so much for coming out tonight to support this book and support this author. And
Thank you, everybody, so much. The last thing I'll say is, writing a book, I've had a lot of lonely moments in my life for various reasons. Some, based on choice, other for other reasons. But writing a book is quite honestly the loneliest thing you could ever do. It is a journey you are on primarily by yourself. You could talk to other people about it, and you could tell them things, they're never going to understand what you're talking about. And all you're going to hear is, well, how's that thing going? And you're just like, I don't know what to say. You know what I'm saying? Actually, I wrote nothing this week. How do you explain that? And it's, you feel bad about it. You start beating yourself up and like, hurry up, let me just get it done. Why is this so difficult? But to see everybody here, this has been like the highlight, of this whole thing. And I thank everybody for coming. There are faces here like I literally haven't seen in 20 years. And it's like so meaningful. My friends from Staten Island are here. This is fucking nuts. So thank you so much.
they're gonna do a photo. We're gonna let them do that. But
1, 2.
books are available for sale. We have some more copies left. If you want to get your copy from us in support of an independent bookstore in Manhattan, they're available at the register. Thank you all for coming out. There will be a signing at this table over here on my left. And we invite you to stick around and hang out for a bit. Thank you so much.